So I have just started the recording.
Got it.
So Tina, how have you been this past week since our last session?
Good. It took me a couple of days, but I actually made a list. I did make a list of things to potentially start posting on Facebook. Kind of did a brainstorming thing, which was actually really positive because once I started working on that list, it 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 just kind of went in a bunch of different directions that I felt really good about. Have I made a post? No, I have not. But I figure at least that was the first step, and I felt good. It took me a little bit to do it. But then I was just like, I just need to buckle down and I need to do this. And I feel good about the results. So now I need to sort of kind of go through that and figure out, all right, what's the next piece that I need to do to tackle that.
Excellent.
So that
Thank
felt
you
good.
for sharing that. So let me ask you if there's anything from last time that you might want to revisit, or there might be something else you'd like to work on today. Some of the things, as I was reviewing the session notes for today, uh, we started with imagining posting this post,
Mhm.
and someone like a woman reading it and rolling her eyes, thinking, here's yet another certification or
Mhm.
something else, or even something that we didn't tap on, which was this might, what is this EFT woo woo out there thing? So that might be some other aspect at
Yeah.
play. And also imagining, for example, that you were to post that sort of presentation, or letting people know that you're an EFT practitioner, and there's absolutely no response to it.
Mhm.
So these were some of the things that came up, and yeah.
Sure. I think in going through and making a list of possible things to sort of open this up for myself, one of the things that I realized is that I don't need to jump right into saying, "Hey, I'm an EFT practitioner." So at the core of sort of my belief system is health and wellness for people in many different areas, and how that impacts us. And it kind of brought me full circle to realizing that there's a lot of ways to approach that, and sharing content, not with the expectation of people signing up for anything, but just sharing content because I just really want to share with people because I think there's a lack of information. So without going too far down that road, really kind of coming full circle on that, what's authentic to me and what feels right to me to post about. And it doesn't have to be about EFT. It can be about anything that I want it to be. Really, I don't have to kind of pigeonhole myself into one topic. So that actually was a huge relief with all of that. And with that, I think that whole woo thing kind of, I was just like, that's just, people say it is. I know it's not. You know it's not. And I think if someone were to inquire more, then I know exactly the value of EFT and how to share resources and research with people. So just the process of making the list really tamed all of that substantially for me. So I don't at this point think that there's nothing immediately popping up for me from last week that's residual to kind of go through. I did make a list of what are some other procrastination things. No shortage there. um, and I think one of the things that would be helpful today is actually pertains to creating a schedule for myself, sort of that time management piece. Um, I did, as I shared last week, I'm taking time off from what has been my full time job for many years now. And at the beginning of the summer, 4 or 5 months ago now, I created a structure, a schedule that I was going to follow. And it was good intentions, badly executed. Always found a way to not do, it's like, oh, it's sunny out. I'm just going to go outside. I'll do that. Everything was, I'll do it later. Um, and it continues to be a battle for me. Like I can create a schedule. It's not that I can't do that. I've tried numerous times. I just never stick to it. I always find a way to put things off, to do things that I would just quite simply rather be doing or I would find more enjoyable. So I'd like to maybe have a little bit more structure in my days.
Okay. And do you think, do you have any sense, like if you were to take a guess, is it the actual, when we think about what might be driving that challenge with sticking to the schedule? is it for some people it might be the actual schedule, like the idea of I have to sort of be controlled by this schedule, or it might be the task itself, like maybe on your schedule you have, I don't know, like responding to emails or writing something, or and it's the task itself that might uh, that might create some sort of um, fear, worry, or unpleasant emotions that people might want to avoid.
Sure. Um, there may be a few things on there that I kind of go like, oh, I know, like I'm just like, I don't really want to do that because, it's like if some of the things we talked about last week, sort of those fears or whatnot. But for the most part, it can be very mundane things that are not that at all. I think it's much more the responding to having a structure and feeling like I'm stuck in a structure. Um, and as I was thinking about this since we met last time, and again, making a list of some of the procrastination aspects, this is the one that really jumped out for me. And the particular piece of it that jumped out at me was, even though I obviously would be the one creating my own schedule, right? Is a sense of like, I don't want to be controlled by it. I want to be free to do what I want to do when I want to do it, which I'm sure probably has its roots in decades of doing things on schedules that other people needed me to do. And now I don't even want to do it for myself. um, so I think that's where it has its roots. And logically, again, that logical piece and the emotional piece are very different reactions to what I should be doing, should being the word there. So.
Right. So I'm thinking that perhaps a good starting point might be either imagining the next time that you were to look at the schedule and the things the schedule tells you you are supposed to be doing, and seeing what comes up as you imagine that, which might be I feel controlled or something else. Um, or thinking about any recent memory within this 5 months ago, within this time period of this having happened, and kind of tapping on this either future or recent event,
Mhm.
uh, and keeping our eyes open if any other previous memory shows up of having been controlled or feeling like you were controlled in the past.
Mhm.
That if that comes up, we might want to tap on that.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can even think because last week I did kind of tweak, my hours, so to speak, that I want to be working. And even the process of doing that, as I was, online changing some of those things around, I was going like, who am I kidding? I'm not going to stick to this. I was entirely talking myself out of what I was doing, and I was annoyed with myself. Like,
Yeah.
why am I doing this to myself? Right. So um, I think it's even just trying to put another structure into place for myself. I get annoyed with myself thinking that I'm just not going to follow it.
And okay, so maybe what if we were to start our first round saying something like, even though when I remember the other day, I was putting together my schedule, and I remember thinking, who am I kidding? I'm not going to stick to it. And when I think about that, it makes me feel annoyed at
Mhm.
myself. And do you feel that anywhere in your body, the annoyed at yourself?
I feel a little bit in my throat.
Okay. And then we say, and this is what I'm noticing right now. Is that phrase okay, or would you prefer something else?
Yep, that's absolutely fine.
Excellent. Great. And as usual, if at any point you wish to change the word, something else comes up, feel free to interrupt me and let me know.
Okay,
That's completely welcome on my end.
great.
Excellent. So, even though
Even though
when I remember the other day,
when I remember the other day,
as I was putting together my schedule,
as I was putting together my schedule,
I remember thinking, who am I kidding?
I remember thinking, who am I kidding?
I'm not going to stick to it.
I'm not going to stick to it.
And when I think about that now,
And when I think about it now,
it makes me feel annoyed at myself.
it makes me feel annoyed at myself.
And I feel this in my throat.
And I feel it in my throat.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
That whole thing fits. Yes, thank you.
Right. And even though,
And even though
when I remember the other day,
when I remember the other day,
as I was putting together my schedule,
as I was putting together my schedule,
I remember thinking, who am I kidding?
I remember thinking, who am I kidding?
I'm not going to stick to it.
I'm not going to stick to it.
When I think about it now, I feel
When I think about it now, I feel
annoyed at myself,
annoyed at myself,
and I feel it in my throat.
and I feel it in my throat.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And even though,
And even though,
when I remember the other day,
when I remember the other day,
as I was putting together my schedule,
as I was putting together my schedule,
I remember thinking, who am I kidding?
I remember thinking, who am I kidding?
I'm not going to stick to it.
I'm not going to stick to it.
And this makes me feel annoyed at myself,
And this makes me feel annoyed at myself.
and I feel it in my throat.
And I feel it in my throat.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And on the top of the head, I feel annoyed at myself,
I feel annoyed at myself.
and I feel it in my throat.
And I feel it in my throat.
Who am I kidding?
Who am I kidding?
I'm not going to stick to it.
I'm not going to stick to it.
Who am I kidding?
Who am I kidding?
I'm not going to stick to it.
I'm not going to stick to it.
I feel annoyed at myself,
I feel annoyed at myself.
and I feel it in my throat.
And I feel it in my throat.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you remember the other day, as you were putting together your schedule, thinking, who am I kidding? I'm not going to stick to it. What do you notice coming up for you now?
It's like, who am I kidding? Well, I'm kidding myself, but that doesn't really impact anybody else. So it's really, it's not impacting anybody else. But now it's more a matter of how do I create like a structure to my days that it's almost like part of me like feels guilty for having time to finally just do the things that I want to do and enjoy. Um, it's a bit like being that teenage kid that your parents say do X and just by default because they tell you to do something, you won't do it. um, and it's sort of like that rebellion in me coming up saying, well, I feel guilty having this time now. I should be doing things. But I don't want to. um, yeah.
And yeah, sorry, were you going to say something
No,
else?
I'm just trying to see if I can get more specific than that, and I can't, it's such this vague sense that I can't pin down otherwise, which is part of why it's frustrating to me.
And as you think about this phrase, part of me feels guilty that I have this time that I should be doing things. Is there any mental image that comes up around that?
Yeah, as soon as you ask that, it's really funny. The first thing that popped to my mind was my father. You gotta work hard, you know what I mean? It's definitely that work ethic that was really enforced when I from a very young age. That very, very strong work ethic.
And out of, I imagine he might have said that phrase many times. Is there any one of those times that maybe stands out as you think about it now, of him saying, you've got to work hard?
Um, and it's really funny because I don't have like a set memory of that. It was just an expectation of, and I can't put it to like a concrete thing or memory at this point, but I just remember like the expectation was, so for example, like when I was in high school, I was in high school full time and I worked full time. When I was in college, I went to college full time and I worked 40 to 60 hours a week. It was just always no free time. You are always busy. You're always working. And that's just how I was raised. And that's how I've lived.
Well, actually, I think that we don't always have to come up with a specific memory because it is a specific mental image. thinking of this mental image. And I say image, it doesn't need to be visual per se. Maybe it's more auditory or
Right.
kinesthetic. But thinking about this sort of mental image of your father saying you've got to work hard, this work ethics. As you think about it now, what feeling or emotion or sensation do you notice coming up?
Um, I feel a sense of, um, I feel like I'm being misunderstood, like he didn't understand me, but that's not my feeling. It's it maybe a little bit of sadness that he just never cut me any slack. And I think there's like a component of sadness that's just like that's the first thing that kind of comes up.
And do you notice this sadness anywhere in your body?
Again, it's in my throat.
Okay. So would it be okay if we were to say connect around something like, even though when I think about this mental image of my father saying, you've got to work hard, I feel this sadness in my throat that he never cut me any slack. And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
So even though
Even though
when I think about this mental image
when I think about this mental image,
of my father saying, you've got to work hard,
this mental image of my father saying, you've got to work hard,
I feel this sadness in my throat,
I feel this sadness in my throat,
thinking that he never cut me any slack.
thinking that he never cut me any slack.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yep, sure is.
And even though
And even though
when I think about this mental image
when I think about this mental image,
of my father saying, you've got to work hard,
when I think about my father saying, you've got to work hard,
I feel this sadness in my throat.
I feel the sadness in my throat.
He never cut me any slack.
He never cut me any slack.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And even though
And even though
when I think about my father saying,
when I think about my father saying,
you've got to work hard,
you've got to work hard,
I feel this sadness in my throat,
I feel the sadness in my throat,
thinking that he never cut me any slack.
thinking he never cut me any slack.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
With sadness in my throat.
The sadness in my throat.
This mental image of my father saying, you've got to work hard.
This mental image of my father saying, you've got to work hard.
He never cut me any slack.
He never cut me any slack.
This sadness in my throat.
This sadness in my throat.
He never cut me any slack.
He never cut me any slack.
He would say, you've got to work hard.
He would say, you've got to work hard.
This sadness in my throat.
This sadness in my throat.
Thinking that he never cut me any slack.
Thinking he never cut me any slack.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you think about this mental image of him saying, you've got to work hard, what is most noticeable about this mental image now?
Um, it's coming, like more specific things are becoming, like I can feel the resentment aspect of it.
Yep.
So again, like the very long hours that I worked from, I don't know, the time I was 15 or 16, just like really long hours for a kid that age. And there were, yeah, like just kind of the resentment towards, and it's funny. One thing is kind of popping out. So I used to work, I worked a job on weekends. So I'd get out of school and then I would work from 3 to 10 o'clock on Friday nights, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Saturdays, and then 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Sunday. So basically like all weekend I worked, right? And where I worked was several miles from our house and I didn't have a car. And I had to walk to and from work. My parents wouldn't drive me. So at like 10 o'clock at night, I'd be walking home. And I just remember thinking to myself, this just sucks. Like, don't other kids' parents at least give them a ride? and it was just that feeling of like, oh my God. So it just, that's kind of a funny memory that popped up of like that, you know, honestly, like I'm kind of busting my ass. I'm doing everything I can. Could they just give me just a little help? Could they at least give me a ride to work?
Yeah.
So
And as you think about, for example, that moment at 10 p.m. at night that you had to walk home because they wouldn't even give you a ride, and thinking this just sucks. Um, what feeling or emotional sensation do you notice coming up for you now?
sad, feel sad.
And do you feel that in your throat as well,
My
or somewhere
heart,
else? Heart.
big time in my
Okay.
heart. Yeah.
Yeah. So how would we say for the next round? Even though,
Even though
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
having to walk home at 10 p.m. at night
having to walk home 10 p.m. at night
because they wouldn't drive me.
because they wouldn't drive me.
And I was thinking, this just sucks.
And I was thinking, this just sucks.
It makes me feel sad in my heart.
It makes me feel sad in my heart.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember walking home in the dark and cold and alone. Like it was just, and it was miles. Like I'm not talking like I worked, like a quarter of a mile down the street. It was like miles from the house. So it's just like a
So,
lot of that
yeah,
imagery. It's just like
yeah. So
it's all
yeah,
there.
so let's add those words then. And so even though,
So even though
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
having to walk miles from work to home
having to walk miles from work to home
in the dark,
in the dark,
cold and alone,
cold and alone,
because they wouldn't give me a ride,
because they wouldn't give me a ride,
and I would think this just sucks.
I would think this just sucks.
It makes me feel sad in my heart.
Makes me feel sad in my heart. They were home nice and warm.
They're all nice and warm. And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yeah.
And even though,
And even though
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
having to walk miles from work to home,
having to walk miles from work to home,
cold and alone,
cold and alone,
because they wouldn't even give me a ride,
because they wouldn't give me a ride,
and I would think this just sucks.
I would think this just sucks.
They are all nice and warm over there at home.
And they're all nice and warm at home. They were tired. They didn't want to come
Yeah,
out.
yeah. It makes me feel sad in my heart.
It makes me feel sad in my heart.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
I feel sad in my heart.
I feel sad in my heart.
I remember thinking this just sucks.
I remember thinking, this just sucks.
Having to walk miles after work
Having to walk miles after work
in the dark,
in the dark,
feeling cold and alone
feeling cold and alone
because they wouldn't even give me a ride.
because they wouldn't even give me a ride.
They'd be warm and nice at home.
They'd be warm and cozy and nice at home.
I feel sad in my heart.
I feel sad in my heart.
And let's take a breath in and out. By the way, if you ever at any moment at the end of the round, if you want us to keep doing another round with the same phrases, simply let me know, and that's totally okay.
Okay, thank you. I will.
Yeah, yeah, right. And so again, as you think back to this time, having to walk from work to home at 10 p.m. in the dark, cold and alone, and they wouldn't even give you a ride, and you would think this just sucks. They were all nice and cozy and warm at home. They were too tired to go and pick you up with their car. What do you know? What feeling, thoughts, emotions, sensations do you notice coming up for you now?
Um, well, obviously, I'm kind of laughing about it. It's just sort of like, to me, it's just ludicrous. Like I will never understand it. I won't. But I think one of the things that came to mind as a positive thing is I do have my own children. They're adults now, and I know that because of my experience, it very much changed my empathy towards them in those types of things. So, always picking them up, always making sure the car was warm. So it's definitely something that I really internalized in myself as something I would never do to my own kids, that they would always like feel safe. And you know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
that's a positive thing that came out from that. But I look back on that, that year that it was a year that I worked in that place that I did that. I'm just like, I don't even know what to think about that. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And do you notice as you remember that scene, that particular scene of at 10 p.m. having to walk in the dark, cold and alone, thinking this sucks? Do you notice any sadness or any resentment that you had mentioned before, or something else?
I just feel tired. Like it makes me feel tired.
Mm.
Like I can
Yeah,
just feel like walking up, there's a big hill.
yeah.
And I can just like remember it was Old Mill Road, there's a big hill. And I just remember walking up that and just being like, I just want to be home. I'm so exhausted.
Yeah.
And I actually like feel that in my back. Like, if when you're really tired, you've done a lot of work or whatever, like your back feels heavy. Like I feel that in my back. Like I just like feel like I'm slouched over walking again.
So how about we say for the next round something like, even though,
Even though
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
having to walk home, having to walk miles uh, from work to home
having to walk miles from work to home
in the dark,
in the dark,
cold and alone,
cold and alone,
because they wouldn't give me a ride.
because they wouldn't give me a ride.
And I remember having to walk up that hill,
And I remember having to walk up that hill,
thinking, I just want to be home. I'm so exhausted.
thinking, I just want to be home. I am so exhausted.
And just thinking about that makes me feel tired.
And just thinking about it makes me feel tired.
And I feel this heaviness in my back.
And I feel this heaviness on my back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay? Would you like us to
Yes.
change or modify? Okay.
Nope, it's fine.
And even though,
And even though
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
having to walk home in the dark,
having to walk home in the dark,
cold and alone,
cold and alone,
having to walk miles,
having to walk miles,
and looking up that hill,
and looking at that hill,
thinking, I just want to be home.
thinking, I just want to be home.
I'm exhausted.
I'm exhausted.
It makes me feel tired,
It makes me feel tired.
and I feel this heaviness on my back.
And I feel this heaviness in my back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And even though,
And even though
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
having to walk miles from work to home
I had to walk miles from work to home
at 10 p.m.,
at 10 p.m.,
feeling cold and alone in the dark,
feeling cold and alone in the dark.
and I had to walk up that hill.
And I had to walk up that hill.
And I remember thinking, I just want to be home.
And I remember thinking, I just want to be home.
I'm so exhausted.
I'm so exhausted.
It makes me feel tired.
It makes me feel tired.
And I feel this heaviness on my back.
And I feel this heaviness on my back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
It makes me feel tired.
It makes me feel tired.
This heaviness on my back.
This heaviness on my back.
I remember walking up that hill,
I remember walking up that hill,
thinking, I just want to be home.
thinking, I just want to be home.
I'm so exhausted.
So exhausted.
It makes me feel tired.
It makes me feel tired.
And I feel this heaviness on my back.
And I feel this heaviness on my back.
I remember thinking, I just want to be home.
I remember thinking, I just want to be home.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you remember that time, walking up that hill, thinking, I just want to be home. I'm so exhausted. What thoughts, emotions, sensations do you notice coming up for you now?
I'm actually really tuned into the backpack I had on my back because I would go straight from school So I'd have all my books and stuff like homework for the weekend, but I also had a change of clothes because the place I worked, I had to wear a uniform. So I can like I just had this vision of this backpack on my back, this really heavy pack on my back.
And as you think about that vision of this really heavy backpack on your back, uh, what feeling, emotion, or sensation do you notice coming up for you now?
I feel mental fatigue, just like mentally, I'm tired, like I've got nothing left to give.
So how would we say for the next round something like, even though?
Even though
When I think about this vision,
when I think about this situation,
the situation of this really heavy backpack on my back,
this really heavy backpack on my back,
having to walk miles carrying it,
having to walk miles carrying it,
I notice this mental fatigue.
I notice this mental fatigue.
I'm tired.
I'm tired.
I've got nothing left to give.
I've got nothing left to give.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yes, it is.
And even though,
And even though,
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
and especially this really heavy backpack on my back
and especially this really heavy backpack on my back
that I had to carry for miles,
that I had to carry for miles,
it makes me feel this mental fatigue.
it makes me feel this mental fatigue.
I'm tired,
I'm tired,
and I've got nothing left to give.
and I've got nothing left to give.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And even though,
And even though,
when I remember that time,
when I remember that time,
having to carry this really heavy backpack on my back
having to carry this really heavy backpack on my back
as I was walking home from work,
as I was walking home from work,
it makes me feel this mental fatigue.
it makes me feel this mental fatigue.
I'm tired.
I'm tired.
I've got nothing left to give.
I've got nothing left to give.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
This mental fatigue.
This mental fatigue.
I've got nothing left to give.
I've got nothing left to give.
Thinking of this really heavy backpack on my back.
Thinking of this really heavy backpack on my back.
I'm tired.
I'm tired.
I've got nothing left to give.
I've got nothing left to give.
Remembering this really heavy backpack on my back.
Remembering this really heavy backpack on my back.
I've got nothing left to give.
I've got nothing left to give.
I'm feeling this mental fatigue.
I'm feeling this mental fatigue.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you think about that time, and especially this vision of the really heavy backpack on your back, having to carry it for miles,
Mm-hmm.
what feeling, emotion, or sensation do you notice coming up for you now?
It's still there, but it's unequivocally a metaphor for how I feel now. And it's EFT is so fascinating because I've knew as soon as we started tapping on this round, like everything just kind of went like, oh, get it. But I have actually numerous times, like to my own clients, sort of made analogies of like our different situations and events in our life. And I've always just kind of said, we all carry stuff on our backpacks. Like we put stuff throughout our life in a backpack on our back. And I've never, ever, ever once connected it to this memory until just now. But I know that's sort of when I think about the past several years and leaving my job, like all those things, I know I have sort of mentally filed, like I just keep on putting stuff in my own backpack and I'm carrying it around. And so there's a clear like metaphor between those two situations that are in my mind. So I think relevant to, so when I think about it, then I go, yeah, of course I was tired. I had this big backpack. Like it's become very logical to me. There's no real emotion left to it. But now I know that that's part of my that aspect of scheduling, I think, is that residual piece of what do I have left to give? How much time do I want? It's like it's that piece of it because I've dedicated many years to supporting and nurturing and caring for other people, which is fine. That like it, but I think at this point I'm just kind of going, that's sort of my own personal backpack that I've carried. And now that I don't have to carry that anymore, part of me feels a little bit guilty for letting it go, I think.
Okay.
Or that I don't have to carry it. Like I don't, it's sort of like if I schedule myself and I create a schedule and I stick to it, am I putting a backpack on my back again?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
It
absolutely.
makes perfect sense to me, but I don't know if it makes
Yeah, it does.
I'm like, all right, I'm totally getting this now.
So then let me ask you, if we go back to um, imagining the next, or even remembering creating or putting together your schedule, but now with this added thought of what do I have left to give? Am I, by creating this schedule, am I putting a backpack on again? As you think about that now, what feeling, emotion, or sensation do you notice coming up for you now?
Apprehension. I feel apprehension that I'm going to put way too much stuff in that backpack again.
And do you notice that apprehension anywhere in your body?
A slight tightness in my upper back.
So would it be would be okay for the next round if we say, as I think about the next time I might create my schedule, or shall we say when I remember the other day as I was putting together my schedule? I mean, it's kind of the same because it's the same theme, but do you have any preference?
I think I like looking at the future piece.
Yeah,
That feels like the right direction to take that.
great, great. So how would we say something like even though?
Even though,
When I imagine the next time
when I imagine the next time
that when I'm putting together my schedule,
when I'm putting together my schedule,
and I have the thoughts, what do I have left to give?
and I have the thoughts, what do I have left to give?
Am I putting on a backpack again?
Am I putting on a backpack again?
I feel this apprehension
I feel this apprehension.
that I might be putting way too much stuff on this backpack again.
I might be putting way too much stuff in this backpack again.
And I feel this slight tightness in my upper back.
And I feel a slight tightness in my upper back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
It is, I think, adding the word heavy somewhere into the backpack piece because
Yes.
that's a piece of it is the weight, is the heaviness.
Perfect. Thank you. So even though,
Even though
when I imagine myself
when I imagine myself
putting together my schedule,
putting together my schedule,
thinking, what do I have left to give?
I'm thinking, what do I have left to give?
Am I putting on a heavy backpack again?
Am I putting on a heavy backpack again?
I feel this apprehension
I feel this apprehension.
that I might be putting way too much stuff on this heavy backpack again.
I might be putting way too much stuff in this heavy backpack again.
And I feel this slight tightness in my upper back.
And I feel this slight tightness in my upper back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yes, it is.
Right. And even though,
And even though,
when I imagine myself
when I imagine myself
putting together my schedule,
putting together a schedule,
thinking, what do I have left to give?
thinking, what do I have left to give?
Am I just putting on a heavy backpack again?
Am I just putting on a heavy backpack again?
I feel this apprehension
I feel this apprehension
that I might be putting way too much stuff on this heavy backpack again.
I might be putting way too much stuff in this heavy backpack again.
And I feel a slight tightness in my upper back.
And I feel a slight tightness in my upper back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
This apprehension
This apprehension
that I might be putting way too much stuff on this backpack again.
that I might be putting way too much stuff in this backpack again.
By putting together my schedule,
By putting together my schedule.
am I putting on a heavy backpack again?
Am I putting on a heavy backpack again?
This slight tightness in my upper back.
It's a tightness in my upper back.
What do I have left to give?
What do I have left to give?
Am I putting on a heavy backpack again?
Am I putting on a heavy backpack again?
This apprehension that I might be putting way too much stuff in this backpack.
This apprehension that I may be putting way too much stuff in the backpack again.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you imagine yourself putting together your schedule, and maybe the thought comes up of what do I have left to give? Am I putting on a heavy backpack again? Or maybe I'm putting way too much stuff on the backpack again. What do you notice coming up for you now?
I notice that certainly, how I create my schedule or what I put in that backpack is something I entirely control. But I also have this piece coming up of, but if I don't give myself enough hours, if I don't put enough on there, am I working hard enough? Am I going to achieve what I think my goals might be? Like, am I putting in enough effort? Yeah, it's kind of that mixed bag, like of I don't want to overdo it, but I also need, am I doing enough?
Yep.
It's that double-edged sword sort of
And
thing.
and as you think about that phrase, imagine yourself putting together your schedule and this phrase, am I putting enough effort? Is there any particular mental image or feeling or thought that comes up when thinking about that?
First thing that comes to mind is, am I just being lazy? Because I'm not working hard enough. Yeah, it just it's just funny. There's such a resistant feeling, and I can't pin down why. I just know it's tied into that balance of the shoulds of well I should be doing this. I should be putting more effort in. I should be more organized. Versus I can do it another day. And it's the pressure of the should.
And when thinking about that pressure, the pressure of the should, is there any mental image that comes up that kind of represents that?
I actually see myself back at my job, sitting at my desk doing paperwork, like all the stuff that, there was no optionality. It was do it by the deadline, that type of thing.
Right. And as you think about seeing yourself back at your job doing the paperwork, there was no optionality. You had to do it by the deadline. And thinking about the pressure of the should, is there any particular physical sensation or feeling that comes up when thinking about it now?
There's a little tightness in my chest.
Okay. So how do I say for the next round something like, even though?
Even though.
When I remember back at my job,
When I remember back at my job,
seeing myself doing the paperwork
seeing myself doing the paperwork
that had to be done by the deadline
that had to be done by the deadlines
with no optionality.
with no optionality.
Now thinking about the pressure of the shoulds.
I'm thinking about the pressure of the shoulds.
I feel this tightness in my chest.
I feel this tightness in my chest.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yes. Yep.
And even though,
And even though
when I see myself back in my job,
when I see myself back in my job,
doing the paperwork
doing the paperwork
that had to be done by the deadline
that had to be done by the deadline
with no optionality,
with no optionality,
and thinking about the pressure of the shoulds,
and thinking about the pressure of the shoulds,
I feel this tightness in my chest.
I feel this tightness in my chest.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And even though,
And even though
when I see myself back in my job,
when I see myself back in my job,
having to do the paperwork
having to do that paperwork
by the deadline
by the deadline
with no optionality,
with no optionality,
thinking about the pressure of the shoulds,
thinking about the pressure of the shoulds,
I feel this tightness in my chest.
I feel this tightness in my chest.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
This tightness in my chest,
This tightness in my chest,
the pressure of the shoulds.
the pressure of the shoulds.
I can see myself doing that paperwork
I can see myself doing that paperwork
with no optionalities.
with no optionality.
It had to be done by the deadline.
It had to be done by the deadline.
The pressure of the shoulds.
The pressure of the shoulds.
This tightness in my chest.
This tightness in my chest.
It makes me feel this tightness in my chest.
Makes me feel this tightness in my chest. Yeah. I know that I don't want to be under that, like that just tremendous amount of like pressure of just like, there's no way I can accomplish all of this. And you know what I mean? And that again is, when I think about like my own schedule, there's nothing that huge or big. It's not like it's not like it's more just like committing to a time. Like I should be able to commit 10 hours a week or 5 hours or whatever it is. Like it's not like I don't have the time. I'm just resistant to committing to it.
And let me ask you, as you go back to that memory of seeing yourself doing that paperwork with no optionality, had to be done by the deadline. Do you notice do you get any sense of any emotional charge, whether it's tightness in your chest or something else, as you think about it again?
It's frustration. There's a lot of frustration because there were the work could have been distributed amongst different staff members, and yet somehow it when other people didn't necessarily take their responsibilities quite so seriously, oftentimes the work came onto my caseload, and that's frustrating, and maybe a bit of resentment. Like I had to do like 2 or 3 people's worth of work. Well, some people got away with doing not much. So there's some frustration there for sure.
Shall we say for next one something like frustration and resentment that the work could have been distributed more fairly, or is there some other phrase that better captures the emotional charge around it?
I think what's more emotionally charged is that I shouldn't have been the one that had to take it all on. Um, yeah, I shouldn't have had to have done all of that alone.
Could you repeat that phrase? I shouldn't have been the one who had to take it.
Had to take all that work on myself.
Yeah. So how do we say, sorry, the frustration, do you notice it anywhere in your body?
But I'd say it still feels tight in my upper back.
Right. So how do we say for the next round something like, even though?
Even though
When I see myself back in my job,
when I see myself back in my job,
doing all that paperwork,
doing all the paperwork,
I feel this frustration.
I feel this frustration.
I shouldn't have been the one who had to take all that work on myself.
Shouldn't have been the one that took all that work onto myself.
And I feel this tightness in my upper back.
I feel this tightness in my upper back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
I think frustration, I think maybe it might actually be more anger than
Okay,
frustration.
perfect.
I think I think it's a step up from frustration. I think
Yes.
it's anger.
Yeah.
Now that I'm kind of tuning into it, yeah.
Yeah. So even though,
Even though,
as I see myself back in my job,
as I see myself back in my job,
having to do that paperwork,
having to do the paperwork,
and I shouldn't have been the one who had to take all that work onto myself.
I shouldn't have had to have taken all that work onto myself.
I feel angry,
I feel angry
and I feel tight in my upper back.
and I feel tight in my upper back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yep, it
Right.
is.
And even though,
And even though
I feel angry.
I feel angry,
As I see myself back in my job,
as I see myself back in my job,
having to do all that paperwork,
having to do all that paperwork,
and I shouldn't have been the one who had to take all that work onto myself.
I shouldn't have had to have done it all by myself.
And I feel tight in my upper back.
And I feel tight in my upper back.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
I feel angry.
I feel angry.
I feel tight in my upper back.
I feel tight in my upper back.
Seeing myself back in my job,
Seeing myself back in my job,
doing all that paperwork,
doing all that paperwork.
and I shouldn't have had to do it all alone.
And I shouldn't have had to have done it all alone.
I shouldn't have been the one who had to take all that work onto myself.
I shouldn't have had to have taken that work on all by myself.
I feel angry.
I feel angry.
And I feel tight in my upper back.
And I feel tight in my upper back.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you see yourself back in your job, having to do that paperwork that wasn't fairly distributed among all the people there, and thinking you shouldn't have been the one who had to take all that work onto yourself. What do you notice coming up for you now?
Um, Still anger, but I'm actually thinking of like a few specific instances where some of my colleagues shared specific scheduling details in which they just said like, well, we're not really sure why you have to be doing all this. Person, that other person has a lot of gaps in their schedule that they actually have time to be doing this work. And the person who oversaw everything chose to ignore those gaps in the schedule and continue to just put it all on me. So, but that was really frustrating to know that it wasn't just me. It was like other people coming up to me saying, we have no idea why you're being asked to do all of this. Like other people have room to be helping out. So, and maybe it's just tied to that whole lack of support thing. My parents wouldn't drive me in the car. My boss wouldn't help me out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
there.
And this anger, do you notice it anywhere in your body?
Um, Not a lot, no.
Okay.
Oh.
Shall we mention the tightness in your upper back as the round before, or is that not there
Um,
anymore?
it's barely there.
Okay. So how do we say for the next round something like, even though,
Even though
when I remember,
when I remember
That even sometimes my colleagues would say to me,
that even sometimes my colleagues would say to me,
"We are not sure why you have to do all this."
we're not sure why you have to do all this.
There's this other person who has several gaps on their schedule,
Because the other person has several gaps in their schedule.
and knowing that the person who oversaw everything
And knowing that the person who oversaw everything
decided to overlook that
decided to overlook that
and let that work fall on me,
and let the work fall on me.
and that makes me feel angry.
And that makes me feel angry.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now. Yep,
Is that whole phrase okay?
it's all good.
Right. And even though,
And even though
when I remember
when I remember
the time when my colleagues would say to me,
the time when my colleagues would say to me,
"We are not sure why you have to do all this."
we're not sure why you have to do all this.
This other person has all these gaps on their schedule,
This other person has all these gaps in their schedule.
and knowing that the person who oversaw everything
The person who oversaw everything
decided to overlook that
decided to overlook that
and let all that work fall on me,
and let all that work fall on me.
and that makes me feel angry.
And that makes me feel angry.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And even though
And even though
I feel angry,
I feel angry,
remembering when my colleagues would say to me,
remember when my colleagues would say to me,
"We are not sure why you have to do all this."
we're not sure why you have to do all this.
This other person has gaps on their schedule,
This other person has gaps in their schedule.
and knowing that the person who oversaw everything
And knowing that the person who oversaw everything
decided to overlook that
decided to overlook that
and let all that work fall on me,
and let all the work fall on me.
and that makes me feel angry.
And that makes me feel angry.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
I feel angry,
I feel angry.
remembering my colleagues saying to me,
Remembering my colleagues saying to me,
"We are not sure why you have to do all this."
we're not sure why you have to do all this.
This other person has gaps on their schedule,
This other person has gaps in their schedule,
but the person who oversaw everything
but the person who oversaw everything
decided to overlook that
decided to overlook that
and let all that work fall on me,
and let all the work fall on me.
and that makes me feel angry.
And that makes me feel angry.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you remember your colleagues at the time saying, "We're not sure why you are why you have to do all this," and knowing that the person who oversaw everything decided to overlook that. And what do you notice coming up for you now?
Um, I think the anger has diminished. And there's like frustration and fatigue associated with that. Um, and kind of a sense of helplessness. Like I just, there's nothing I can do to change this.
And
Well,
between
except what I
the
did, which was quit.
right, that's true. And between the frustration, the fatigue, and the helplessness, is there any one of them that feels more either a bit more present or like it's calling more for, is drawing more your attention for the next round?
Yeah, I think it's quite honestly, when you said that, putting them all together, just this feeling of being utterly overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like they just kind of all combined into a sense of being overwhelmed.
Yeah. Utterly overwhelmed. And you mentioned also the phrase, "There's nothing I could do about it."
Mhm.
There's nothing I can do about it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It had to all get done. So
And this utterly overwhelmed feeling, do you notice it anywhere in your body?
um actually my rib cage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we say for the next round something like even though?
Even though,
When I remember working at that job,
when I remember working at that job,
having to do all that paperwork,
having to do all that paperwork,
and my colleagues would sometimes say to me,
and my colleagues would sometimes say to me,
"You're not sure why you have to do all this.
we're not sure why you have to do all this.
This other person has gaps on their schedule.
This other person has gaps in their schedule.
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
There's nothing I could do about it."
There's nothing I can do about it. And what's coming to me now is I have no option but to do this. Like I have, again,
Mm.
it's that
Yeah,
option piece just popped right back in. Like I have no options but to do this.
I have no options but to do this.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
feel this feeling in my ribcage.
And I feel this feeling in my rib cage.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can even I think we can even leave the part out now about my colleagues saying you shouldn't have been the whole one. It's just really about me seeing that like I had to do it and not having options
Yeah.
to not do it.
Yes. Yes.
Is
Awesome.
that's really sort of what I'm tuning into now. It's less about what other people had to say.
Great. Excellent. So
Even though
when I remember having to work at that job,
when I remember having to work at that job,
seeing myself doing all that paperwork,
seeing myself doing all that paperwork,
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
There's nothing I could do about it.
There's nothing I can do about it.
I have no options but to do this.
I have no options but to do this.
It had to all get done.
It had to all get done.
And I feel this overwhelmed feeling in my ribcage.
And I feel this overwhelmed feeling in my rib cage.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
Yes, thank you.
Right. And even though,
And even though
when I remember working at that job,
when I remember working at that job,
having to do all that paperwork,
having to do all that paperwork,
knowing that I had no options but to do this,
knowing that I had no options but to be the one to do it,
it had to all get done.
it had to all get done.
And there's nothing I could do about it.
There's nothing I could do about it.
Thinking about it makes me feel utterly overwhelmed.
Thinking about it makes me feel utterly overwhelmed.
And I feel this in my ribcage.
And I feel it in my rib cage.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
And I feel this in my ribcage.
And I feel this in my rib cage.
There's nothing I could do about it.
There's nothing I can do about it.
I have no options but to do this.
I have no options but to do this.
This paperwork has to all get done.
This paperwork has to all get done.
And I have no options but to do it.
And I have no options but to do it myself.
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
I feel utterly overwhelmed.
And I feel it in my ribcage.
And I feel it in my rib cage.
And let's take a breath in and out. And again, as you see yourself having to do all that paperwork by yourself, even though other people could have chipped in and contributed, it all fell on you and you had no options but to do it. What do you notice coming up for you now?
Just the sense of like, why didn't I leave sooner? I sort of think it's always going to be something that is just frustrating. It's just the nature of that situation. But it doesn't feel as it's just not nearly as intense. It's just kind of like what a ludicrous situation it was to be in, to be put into. So,
yeah.
So
and thinking about this sort of image of seeing yourself doing that paperwork by yourself because it had fallen onto you, and the person who oversaw everything let the other person with the gaps in their schedule let it slide, and so it all fell onto you with not much support. Is there any aspect of this memory that you notice might still have a charge for us to tap on?
Just me annoyed with myself going, why did I put up with it for so long? Is really kind of what it comes down to, you know?
Yeah. And as you think, why didn't I leave sooner? Why did I put up with it for so long, what feeling, emotion, or sensation do you notice coming up for you now?
Um, um, just this very low key sense of oh, I don't even know what a word would be for, but just like a, why did I do that to myself?
Yeah. Okay.
You know?
And do you notice that anywhere in your body?
Um, no, not really.
Okay.
No,
So how would we say something like, even though?
even though
When I remember working at that job,
when I remember working at that job,
having to do all that paperwork by myself,
having to do all that paperwork by myself
and having no options but to do it,
and having no options but to do it.
I feel like, why didn't I leave sooner?
But like, why didn't I leave sooner?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Is that whole phrase okay?
It is.
Right. And even though,
And even though
when I remember working at that job,
when I remember working at that job,
having to do all that paperwork by myself,
having to do all the paperwork by myself,
having no options but to do it,
having no options but to do it,
I feel like, why didn't I leave sooner?
I feel like, why didn't I leave sooner?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And even though,
And even though,
as I remember working at that job,
as I remember working at that job,
having to do all that paperwork by myself,
having to do all that paperwork by myself,
with no options but to do it,
with no options but to do it,
I feel like, why didn't I leave sooner?
I feel like, why didn't I just leave sooner?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
And this is what I'm noticing right now.
Why didn't I just leave sooner?
Why didn't I just leave sooner?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why didn't I just leave sooner?
Why didn't I just leave sooner?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why didn't I leave sooner?
Why didn't I leave sooner?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why didn't I leave sooner?
Why didn't I leave sooner?
Why did I put up with it for so long?
Why did I put up with it for so long? Um, well, the reason I put up with it for so long is because I wanted to make sure I was doing the best I could for my colleagues, because I do believe in having a good, solid work ethic. And when other people need to have things done, I'm not the kind of person just kind of like well, that's not my problem. I'm always a jump in and I'll help you out. I'll do it. Like, it'll get done. Right. Um, but the good news is I did leave. um, so, and I could have stuck it out and continued doing it, and I didn't. And so that's the positive with all of it, is that I finally just made the break from that situation. So,
And let me ask you, going back to imagining yourself putting your schedule together, and there was this part of you that feels guilty that you have the free time, but also the concern that, am I putting on a heavy backpack again, or putting way too much stuff on the backpack? What do you notice coming up for you as you imagine yourself putting together your schedule?
mhm. I think kind of my shift with that is that originally what I was thinking of was like, carving out time in my schedule. So just as an example, like every Monday and Tuesday night from, I don't know, 5 to 9 or whatever, that would be when I did some work for my business. That would be when I took care of like other things, like not for my business, whatever. That was going to be like my time dedicated to just getting stuff done or whatever. Um, and I'm realizing now that like it just doesn't have to be that rigid, that I can, maybe allot a certain amount of time for one thing. Like, all right, well, I'm definitely going to work on, I don't know, pick one of my things to do, on the to do. Um, and that is something that I should do by on this day, like pick one or two things. So rather than trying to wrap everything into a schedule, um, picking one or two things that I hold to a schedule and just start with that. And then if I feel like I want to add more in, so rather than taking an all or nothing approach to it, which is I think what I was doing, um, just really easing into it a bit more, just saying, well, I'm just going to do it this way, put one or two things in there. And then during the rest of the week, as I want to do other things, then I'll get them done. And I'll let myself know that that's okay. I can give myself permission to give myself options with some of those things, to kind of gradually ease back into more of a structure and having some things that I do adhere to a bit more. That feels more comfortable,
Exactly. Yeah.
like a
And
balance.
I actually think that when it comes to procrastination, um, yes, like there are some reasons why we procrastinate that we can tap on and are like tappable issues and might be connected to memories as it happened today. But sometimes it might be that the way we are going about it, like, this whole idea of we have to put together a schedule a certain way because that's how it's taught by productivity experts or whatever. And
Right.
maybe that particular way, which might be like a sort of like an all or nothing approach, maybe it doesn't work for us, or it doesn't fit our style. And
Hmm.
I think that it's great that you're getting a sense of how you can come up with something that works for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, again, from working full time or actually working multiple jobs, and like having to function on a schedule, 7 days a week, pretty much. Um, and now it's like the exact opposite of that. And I think that there's just resistance. Like, I don't want to go back to that, but I was putting myself in that framework of all or nothing. Um, and it just sort of shifting to the like, well, I can ease into it. I can do one or two things on a schedule and hold myself accountable to those things. And then let other things just kind of fit in where they're going to fit in, where it makes sense in the week. And that's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay.
excellent. And as you imagine yourself thinking that, or putting together a schedule with that new mindset in mind, that it doesn't have to be all or nothing, you can ease into it, choosing one or two things that you make sure get done, and then the other things you'll see how or when they fit in, and that's okay. Do you notice any? Imagine yourself implementing this new way to go about putting together your schedule. Do you notice any sort of concerns or coming up or something like that?
No, I mean, I sort of the thing that's immediately coming to mind is I need to prioritize that list. What are things that are um, more time specific so that I don't let them go too long and then go, oh, well, I've got like 1 day left to do that. So, carving out time for those things that are in my schedule. Um, so really breaking it up into what are the essentials, what are the things that can have more time built in that I have more flexibility with, and building it around that. Um, so that seems very manageable and very doable. Um, yeah, no, I think that feels very doable to me. And then with the flexibility of knowing I may need to change it a little bit, you know what I mean? Like that, and giving myself room to just go like, well, I'll revisit it. If I need to tweak it, needing to tweak it and adjust it doesn't mean I've failed at it. It just
Yeah,
means I need to like rethink it a bit, and that's okay. Like I would tell somebody else like it's okay. It's not a big deal. Like you can change your schedule, right? Um, and just you know, maybe treating myself a little bit kinder over that.
yeah, and I love that phrase you said that needing to tweak it and modify it doesn't mean you failed.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's
Well, it,
yeah,
it doesn't mean I failed, and it's not a reason to just go like, I just can't do this. Like I can't just give up on it. Like that's which I think I've just gone like, oh, I'm just going to wait. Again, it's that all or nothing mentality, and it's just not a sign. I guess the way I have to look at it, quite honestly, Bruno, is that this whole thing is a transition for me, and I have to give myself
yeah,
grace to go. I am going through, like, I'm really trying to adjust to a whole new lifestyle and a way of approaching how I do things. Um, which I guess I'm very fortunate that I get this option, so I just need to adjust to it.
great. And what do you notice now in terms of that sort of teenage part of you, or teenage feeling of like rebellion, or I don't want to, I'm being put into a structure?
She's always going to be there. um, but I think she and I can work together now.
Nice.
I think we can be coworkers now.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, and but all laughs aside, the different parts of us, they are there, and they have usually a positive intention, or a need, or something that needs to be listened to and honored. And it's not about like tapping them away, but as you
Right.
say, like finding a way that you can sort of work together, and come up with a way where she can get, I mean, this part of you can get her needs met in terms
Right.
of freedom or not being controlled, and you can get your needs met of getting some of the work done
Right.
that you decide that needs to be done.
Mhm. Well, I think
Yeah.
there's, I mean, I joke around that about that teenager who I fully acknowledge is like just very much a part of me. um, that independent streak. And for as much as sometimes it can be a frustration, like in situations like this, when, that is popping up, I can also very much appreciate the value of that independent, call it independent, call it rebellious, whatever you want. There's also a tremendous value in that sometimes too. So it's a part of me that, like I said, we just need to talk and get along a little better sometimes.
Excellent. Great.
So
Uh, is there anything else that you'd like us to tap on before? And of course, we can do some sneaking away. But besides that, is there anything else that's kind of popping up that you'd like us to?
yeah, no, I
Uh,
mean, I feel really good. I really, I want to put this into place within the next, like, um, I'd like to get it done. Like within the next week, I'd like to have a good structure in place that I think about, that has some of those priority things on it, so that I can know, like, by day X, this, this responsibility and this responsibility are taken care of, like in a timely manner. Um, and so that's definitely something that I think I'm going to do. I'm going to start very small with it and not put a lot of stuff on, block off a lot of things. But I think just taking a step at doing that and holding myself accountable to one piece at a time is the way that just feels right for me to approach it, and then kind of change it from there.
I notice myself in my own life that sometimes if I try to put, like, to have too many goals for the day, or too many things on my schedule, too many things on my to-do list, there are so many that I end up doing none at all. Whereas if I say okay, one or two things have to get done, or I'm gonna focus on prioritizing these one or two things, and then if as an extra or bonus I feel like doing something else, that's okay. Then that ends up being a more effective approach at getting things done,
Yes.
because sometimes we want to, like, let's bring in more things on the list, and we end
Right.
up, it has this paradoxical effect of we end up not doing anything at all.
Exactly. And yet at the same time, the flip side of that too is that, when you start off with just those few things, sometimes just doing those few
Yeah.
things gives you the momentum to go, oh,
Yes.
I actually have time to do this. I could do this. Well, so, and I find that
Yeah.
it's a very interesting way that it's just like, well, I can just tackle that and this and that. And it's initiating those thing
Yeah.
or two. And then, that's how
Yeah.
absolutely. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Momentum. Yeah.
Yes.
So how about we do some sneaking away? I'm gonna use some of the phrases that came up at the end, saying something like, even though
Even though
there might be some more work to be done on my procrastination.
there might be still some more work to be done on my procrastination.
I realized today that when it comes to scheduling,
I realize today that when it comes to scheduling,
it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
I can ease into it,
I can ease into it,
and that's okay.
and that's okay.
And even though
And even though
there might be some more work to be done on the issue of procrastination,
there might be more work to be done on the issue of procrastination,
I also realized that needing to tweak and modify my schedule
Needing to tweak and modify my schedule
doesn't mean that I failed.
doesn't mean that I failed.
And even though
And even though
there might be some more work to be done on the issue of procrastination,
there might be more work to be done on the issue of procrastination,
my teenage self and I it feels like can now work together.
it feels like my teenage self and I can work together on it.
And I feel really good right now.
I feel really good right now.
I want to put this new strategy into place.
I want to put this new strategy into place.
And I also realized that I did leave that job.
And I realized I did leave that job.
And it doesn't have to be, when it comes to scheduling, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
And when it comes to the scheduling, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
I can ease into it.
I can ease into it.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
My teenage self and I can work together.
My teenage self and I can work together.
And needing to tweak and modify my schedule doesn't mean that I failed.
And needing to tweak and modify my schedule does not mean that I have failed.
And let's take a breath in and out.
Good.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tina. I'm gonna stop the recording and
Thank you.
then we can talk a few minutes.